Hello, and welcome to our study of Christ and His Church. Spending the year spending time going through the book of Luke and Acts, um, and breaking them down chapter by chapter. This week we're in Acts chapter 12, and we have a pretty good story here that I think draws out two really good points. Talks about the power of prayer, of earnest prayer, the power of earnest prayer, and the Word of God compared to um, any man-made institution, but especially the powers in the day. That would be the powers of Rome. But power of prayer and the power of God, I think, really come out in this chapter. So we're gonna read through the chapter and just kind of point out some stuff as we go along. It's Acts chapter 12, verse 1. If you want to go ahead and pull out a Bible or anything and follow along. It says, "About that time, Herod the king laid violent hands on some who belonged to the church. He killed James, the brother of John, with a sword, and when he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. This was during the days of unleavened bread. And when he had seized him, he put him in prison, delivering him over to 4 squads of soldiers to guard him, intending after the Passover to bring him out to the people. So Peter was kept in prison, but earnest prayer was made for him was made for him to God by the church." And so you have persecution increasingly ramping up, and Peter's getting put on the spotlight. It's right during the time of unleavened bread. The Jews are involved in this as well, and so they hold on. They want to hold on a little bit and wait for these important holidays for the Jews to kind of pass, and then they'll go on with Peter. And so he's kept with 4 squads of soldiers around him to keep him. But earnest prayer for him was made to God by the church, is what it says in verse 5. So it goes on. "Now when Herod was about to bring him out on that very night, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and sentries before the doors were guarding the prison." So he's just on lockdown, right? "And behold, an angel of the Lord stood next to him, and a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him up, saying, 'Get up quickly,' and the chains fell off his hands. And the angel said to him, 'Dress yourself and put on your sandals.' And he did so. And he said to him, 'Wrap your cloak around you and follow me.' And he went out and followed him. He did not know that what was being done by the angel was real, but thought he was seeing a vision. When they had passed the first and second guard, they came to the iron gate leading into the city. It opened for him on its own accord, and they went out and went along one street, and immediately the angel left him. When Peter came to himself, he said, 'Now I am sure that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from the hand of Herod and from all that the Jewish people were expecting.'" So you have this magnificent story of an angel coming down in the middle of all this happening to Peter, right? All these different layers of protection trying to lock down Peter. An angel comes, the chains fall off. He is seemingly not able to be seen by anyone around him, right? And Peter is just mind blown and also a little groggy, right? This is in verse 11 when he comes to himself. If you're anything like me, I'm a very deep sleeper, so when I wake up, it takes me a little bit to kind of like, okay, what is going on? Where am I sometimes? Maybe a little bit of that's happening to Peter because he wakes up, doesn't really, can't really understand everything that's going on, thinks that he's almost dreaming, right? But goes through all these different levels right out of the gate, and then immediately the angel leaves. And Peter finally is waking up, realizes what's happened. He's out of the cell, out of the city, and he looks back and he says, "Now I'm sure that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from the hand of Herod and from all that the Jewish people were expecting." And here is where the power of prayer, like what did that earnest prayer back in verse 5 of chapter 12 do? The church was praying for him earnestly. And here's the effect of that prayer. Here's the power of that prayer. And Peter looks back and he says, man, now I've seen what the Lord has done. And maybe you've had some times in your life like that too, where something has happened and gone on, and you just dropped to your knees and said, man, God, I need you in this moment. I know I've had times like that in my life, right, where we just drop down in prayer and very eagerly pray to God for the whatever situation is happening. And I know sometimes too, I neglect to look back and say, man, look at what God has done for me in this moment. Sometimes I can even give credit to myself, like, oh, I did pretty good helping me get myself out of that situation or whatever, right? But Peter looks back at the situation and is like, man, no one could have done this except for God, and gives thanks to God in this moment for all that is, for delivering him out. And so he goes to the house of Mary. When he realized this, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose other name was Mark, where many were gathered and were praying. And when he knocked at the door of the gateway, a servant girl named Rhoda came to answer. Recognizing Peter's voice, in her joy she did not open the gate, but ran in and reported that Peter was standing at the gate. She realizes it's Peter, hears his voice, and she's so overjoyed she didn't even answer the door, right? She just goes and tells everybody, like, hey, Peter's here. But they said to her, you are out of your mind. But she kept insisting that it was so. And they kept saying, it's his angel. And they saw, they said, it is his angel. But Peter continued knocking. And when they opened, they saw him and were amazed. But motioning to him with his hand to be silent, he described to them how the Lord had brought him out of prison. And he said, tell these things to James and the brothers. Then he departed and went to another place. Now, when day came, there was no little disturbance among the soldiers over what had become of Peter. And after Herod searched for him and did not find him, he examined the sentries and ordered that they should be put to death. Then he went down from Judea to Caesarea, and he spent time there. And so Peter finally goes to the house of all his disciples who are praying for him. He appears to them. They're overjoyed, right, of what's happened. And he says, look, spread news of this as far as you can to the rest of the church, to let them know, one, that he is safe and that prayer has worked, but maybe also, too, to encourage them who may also be in persecution, right? Persecution's widespread around here. But Peter uses this moment of deliverance, but also imprisonment, right, to encourage the rest of the Christians there, to say, look, it may get bad, but the Lord is on our side, right? We can do this. Because, of course, they have this huge task before them to take the gospel to all the world. And that is no easy task for them as they're facing all this persecution. But a wise man and preacher I once heard speak, his name is Kirk Brothers, he said that the gospel will never be chained as long as Christians are willing to be chained for the gospel. So as long as Christians are willing to be put in situations like Peter, willing to face whatever it takes, the gospel is never going to be chained. And that's what you see over and over again in the book of Acts, of Christians, early Christians saying, man, I know we're facing a lot, but we're going to put our heads down and continue to take the gospel to Judea and Samaria and the rest of the world, regardless of what comes. And because of that, the gospel spreads like wildfire. It's something that was needed then and something that's still needed today, right? Am I willing to face whatever it takes for the spread of the gospel to those around me? Peter and the disciples certainly were. Um, and so you get amazing stories like this, right? And so it's going to go on in verse 20 um, to talk about the death of Herod, which is obviously a very big deal politically for them, but also I think it points out a little nugget about the power of God too. So now Herod was angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and they came to him with one accord, and having persuaded Blastus, the king's chamberlain, they asked for peace because their country depended on the king's country for food. On an appointed day, Herod put on his royal robes, took his seat upon the throne, and delivered an oration to them. And the people were shouting, "The voice of God and not of a man." Immediately, an angel of the Lord struck him down because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms and breathed his last. But the word of God increased and multiplied. And Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem when they had completed their service, bringing with him John, whose other name was Mark. A really vivid story to end it off, but Herod takes his position, puts on all his signs of power, and you have the people chanting the voice of a God, not of a man. And so you see a little bit of, we know in history of how some of the political leaders, especially in Rome, were viewed as almost as at a position of gods in some way, that very highly held. And so this starts happening to Herod, and immediately an angel of the Lord struck him down. And so you get this story of the power of man, right, being immediately taken down, almost in an instant, right, contrasted to the word of God, which continues to increase and multiply. And you have a similar saying in Isaiah, right, I think, of how the flowers, the grass withers, the flowers fade, the temporary nature of everything that's around us, right? But the word of the Lord stands forever. And so it points out the power of God in this story, I think, and shows how like all these powers may be rising and they're falling and different people are coming up. Yeah, all these different things are gonna crumble eventually. But the word of God increases and multiplies all over the world at that point. And so those are the two big takeaways from Acts chapter 2 that I think it points out. The power of earnest prayer and realizing who we're praying to and where those blessings come from. And also the power of God over against any worldly power. Like you think of how powerful Rome was, and they probably did not think of anything being able to overtake Rome. But over and over again in Acts, you see powers come down, rise, come down, but the word of God continues to increase all over the known world. And we will see more of that as we go through Acts. Next week will be Acts 13. I think maybe Steve will be taking that. So go ahead and get a jump start on that. Glad you could join us today and hope you have a great rest of the week.